Hey there! Did you know Kroger always gives you savings and rewards on top of our lower-than-low prices? And when you download the Kroger app, you'll enjoy over $500 in savings every week with digital coupons. And don't forget fuel points to help you save up to $1 per gallon at the pump. Want to save even more? With a Boost membership, you'll get double fuel points and free delivery. So shop and save big at Kroger today. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Savings may vary by state. Restrictions apply. See site for details.
Empire.
Hello and welcome to another live stream edition of the John Connery Report. Do me a favor, subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcast. You're watching on YouTube. Like button, subscribe button, you know the deal. You can always read my work on ESPN.com, and you can find us on YouTube as part of Empire Media, AMP-IRE. And as you can see, my pal Bram Weinstein, the voice of the Commanders, is joining me to talk about a few changes. Just a couple things going on, Bram, and I think we can finally talk more about the possibilities going forward and how this organization can remake itself. And already some names have surfaced. What intrigues you most? What do you think about some of those names we've seen so far?
Let's see. Let me start from the beginning here. So I really like Josh Harris's press conference. I thought he hit a lot of the high notes. I mean, just think about this for a moment. He's describing a scenario by which here's somebody who's extremely successful, who says, I need to surround myself with very smart people to help make the right decisions about running a football organization. And think about the previous ownership and how that was just flatly not the case. So it was really refreshing to hear all of that. Obviously they've cast a wide net. And I think they're purposeful in putting out there that they're open to the best and the brightest, and they're not being secretive about it because they want to attract that. So, let's see how this thing plays out. I think that you're going to hear about someone running the front office in the very near term, probably within a week, if I had to guess. And then the head coaching stuff is tough to know because a lot of the candidates are going to be in the playoffs starting this weekend. And, it's likely that somebody who's going to be the head coach of this team is participating in the playoffs. So I have a feeling it would take a little while for that.
Right. And I, going back to the press conference, because I talked about that on the podcast yesterday, but I think it did really stick out to me with Harris's approach, but it's exactly what I expected from him. It's just that when you've covered an organization that ran things completely different for 2 decades plus, then it's a refreshing change, I'm sure, for the fans. And it's a notable one for if you're sitting in the media, because it's very, very different. And it was Dan Snyder always wanted to prove or show that he was a football guy. The last thing anybody would describe him as is a football guy. And I remember, Bram, and this is going way back, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but if you remember, there was one time there was an article about him in GQ or Washingtonian, I think it was. And he described himself as a guy's guy. I'm like, the last thing you are is that. But he thought he was a football guy and he wanted to prove it. Josh Harris isn't trying to prove it. What he wants to do is build a winner. Now, doesn't mean you're going to get every move right, but I think it's like he understands who he is, what he knows and doesn't know, and is going accordingly. So, I guess with that, you have Bob Myers and Rick Spielman in charge. What do you think about that pairing?
Well, before I answer that question, you need to answer this. And I was killing you about this the other day. Rick Spielman popped up on your podcast, 3 weeks ago?
Yeah, how about that?
Out of the blue,
yeah,
he's hired as part of this advisory board. Not that he's not qualified for it, but it felt like more of a coincidence to me than not. So, one, do you think they listened to your podcast and hired him? And two, are you now part of the advisory board, being that they're listening to you and taking opinions and recommendations from you directly?
Well, Bram, if they are, it's about damn time, because I've had all the answers for years if they had just listened to me. So here's the funny thing about that. First of all, what I was really hoping is when someone asked Josh Harris about how did you stick on Rick Spielman, I was hoping he'd say, Well, I was listening to the John Kahn report, and it struck me that he said, but unfortunately, I don't think that's what happened. I definitely think people there listen to it, because I think this ownership group is wants to know what's being talked about and discussed about the franchise, and where is that information possibly coming from? Because I think they kind of felt like this was a rather leaky organization. So somebody listened to it, probably. Now, and I would love to say that, he got it because of that. I'm pretty sure now in hindsight that he knew at that time that he was probably coming here. And what I found interesting is, I remember it was when I asked somebody, third team, and it's ex-coaches and all that. And so I asked them if Rick would want to come on, because I want to talk to somebody who had been in a GM role. What's important to you when you're looking at a job, et cetera. And so when they quickly agreed, I'm like, oh, I wonder if he's angling for a position here. But it turns out, I think he already had it, or at least was certainly far along in discussions. Because I know, like Bob Myers, my understanding is I think that was in the works for a little while. And there was talk or rumors about it for a little while, that you find this out after the fact. But so I think they had this pairing in mind for probably a little bit. And I think it may have well been when he was on. So, but it was good insight. I will say that, Bram.
Yeah, it was. All right. So since you have their ear, and they'll be listening to this later tonight after they conduct their first round of interviews, let's get to what Keith says here. If you two had a say, thank you for including me, on who you would like to see heading up football operations and GM. So we'll start there. Football operations GM, which is going to be the first hire. Who are you eyeing?
Well, I think the number one name is Adam Peters, the guy from San Francisco, assistant GM out there, has had a lot of influence in the decision-making out there. I know John Lynch has a title, does a lot of work, but he's kind of gotten some promotions. And with each one, Adam Peters is moving up. I think you start there. I think there are other ones that I would say I really like Ian Cunningham. I think has a lot to offer. He worked for some really good organizations, Philly and Baltimore. Will McClay from Dallas is considered very smart. I think for him, it would be nice to get out of the Jones shadows, because Jerry and Steven run that show. But Will McClay is the kind of guy, he's a definite talent finder. I think Glenn Cook from Cleveland done a nice job there. But I think you start with Adam Peters. I think that, and then I would go if you could somehow get Adam Peters and Ian Cunningham to be beneath him, I don't know that he would do that with the GM title, but I think that would be a really good pairing. So there's others, there's some really good candidates at that spot, but I would start with Adam Peters. How about you?
It's my opinion that it's his job to take if he wants it. It probably will come down to title and power.
Right.
But listen, they have to go through a process. They should meet with everybody. It sounds like they're open-minded to a lot of different people, and they want a varying amount of opinions from very successful people, Magic Johnson, Bob Myers, Rick Spielman, of course, the ownership group themselves, to try to come to the right conclusion. And listen, once you go through that's why you have these interviews. You want to meet these people and see if they, to give you a sense of who you should pick. But in my opinion, he is a clear front runner for this.
Yeah.
This team wants to emulate a few different organizations. It's very hard in the NFL in this cap era and in this time of free agency to have consistent success. And it is hard not to be envious of what San Francisco, Baltimore, Philadelphia, and to maybe a lesser degree, Pittsburgh have done, over this period of time. And to take somebody who's had that kind of experience at San Francisco in a place where they seemingly have a consistent turned over, extremely strong roster, very good culture. I hate using that word because that's been run through the mill around here. But clearly they know what they're doing. And so I think that having someone straight out of that organization feels right to me.
Yes. And, there's a couple things with it too. First of all, Bob Myers got to know him, sounds like pretty well, when they were both in San Francisco with Myers as the GM with Golden State. And I think he was at the facility, the 49ers facility, enough where they got to know each other. I think that helps. And, just the familiarity with that helps. But I also think, Bram, that this is a guy that, talking to people earlier in the year, because you knew where this was going this year at a certain point, and talking to people earlier this year, like the feeling was, would he really agree to move? Because he has a lot of power and say in that organization. The fact that he's taken this interview is a pretty damn good sign for this group.
Yes.
And I think if you can give him, like, John Lynch can be bumped up to this kind of title in San Francisco and he could get the GM title, but you might have a chance to come here and be even more. And, he's kind of handled a lot of the GM type duties out there. So the fact that he's taking it is a really good sign for this group. The other thing is too, I wrote that story last week about how Josh Harris kind of comes to decisions and how he's pursued guys in the past that he really wants, like when it was Daryl Morey or Doc Rivers, guys like that. He moves fast and aggressive. So if Adam Peters that they want after going through this first round, and I have a feeling that's what they're going to. This is just a gut feel, not a reporting feel, because they're being very secretive on it. Any information you're seeing on this is not coming from them. So, but having said that, if this is the guy they want, they're going to move hard and fast to get it done. And that's why, to your point earlier, I think this is something that somebody in that role, I think would within a week is certainly not far-fetched at all.
Yeah. And, with the coach situation, we'll have to see. We'll get to that in a minute. There's one other thing that I think should be pointed out about this process. It was clear to us that are around it a lot. It was clear to us that the separation of duties was going to occur. And Josh Harris made that very clear in the press conference. And Ron Rivera finally truth told, at the last, in his last press conference when he knew what the writing on the wall was, but he had said it. It was the first time we heard someone publicly say they're going to split the duties. Not that this was a surprise to anybody. Well, knowing that going in and knowing whether Rivera made a case to keep his job as the head coach or not, but he was never going to hold the position of the personnel chief any longer, no matter what, however the season played out. This process started earlier for them.
Yes.
The idea of getting the new head coach, well, that's a little more complicated, especially if you want to get to somebody who is under contract, which is everybody, short of Jim Harbaugh. If you wanted to talk to him in advance, I suppose you could have, because you don't have to ask for permission to do something like that. But the rest of them you do, and nobody's going to do it until it's permissible to do so. So the coaching search begins in earnest the other day. But the front office part of this is weeks in the making.
Oh, definitely.
I do believe that this will happen very, very quickly. And I think we know who they want, and let's just see if they can get that deal done.
Right. And, and I wanted to answer this question. Father Zaya said, let's say Adam Peters is head of football operations. Will he hire the GM or will he carry both titles? Mark Mayhew was with him in San Fran and will stay on because of that. First of all, to answer the second one, I doubt it. I can't say for sure. I honestly, I don't know the answer. And I guess it would depend on the role. I would be surprised by that. I think they're going to want to bring in their own people. I would always say, just because they work together, have familiar, and I'm not just in general, there have been a lot of times in the past where people have worked together and it's not always, maybe not always a great thing. But in this case, I don't know, but my sense would be they would want to, the expectation there has been cleaning house, right? So I don't know that would happen. As far as which titles would he hold, I think in an ideal situation, they'd have a president of football ops, a GM, and then the coach.
Correct.
But I think one thing that Harris seemed
go, and that's kind of what I've been told the structure would be.
Right. Me too. But I think with an open mind to maybe you do it that way, with the New Jersey Devils, Tom Fitzgerald has a president of hockey operations plus GM, but they also have Martin Brodeur, who also has a president of hockey ops title. They're both executive, or senior VP of hockey ops, whatever. Similar title, but Fitzgerald has that plus a GM. But I would kind of lean toward what you just said. Not even lean, it's what I've heard too, but there's an open mind if they wanted to have one, but I would expect a GM most likely.
Yeah, I think unless someone really wows them in an interview, I think the first choice is Adam Peters. That's just my gut.
Yes, that's my sense. That would be my take. I say instead
it doesn't mean he's going to take the job. So, we'll see how this plays out.
Right. But I do think, Bram, you're right. He may not take it. The fact that he's interviewing, he knows Bob Myers. I think that that's really, once you start doing that, I think you're kind of down the road a little bit. And it's funny because, one of the things when you look at this job, and there's obviously other jobs open for whether it's, general managers or coaches, I still think, the more I hear from other people, this is a really, really good job. And you have a chance to rebuild a historic organization with a fan base desperate to embrace them again.
And John, the bar is really low here.
But the potential. So then you have a new owner with the resources, and then you have all the picks and you have the money. It's a really, really good situation. So I could see if you're going to leave a really good organization like the 49ers, where you have a lot of say and input, and you're from that area, it better be for something where you think it's like, this is just too good to pass up.
You can be bronzed here. This is an opening for the next Joe Gibbs, the next Bobby Beathard. It's just been so long. People are starved. This ownership group, if you're paying attention to them, they're living it and breathing it, and they love it. It's not that Dan Snyder didn't, but these guys do. They clearly are committed to doing literally to try to make this a winner. And they're thinking about it thoroughly, and they're thinking about it, I think, collectively, and I think they're thinking about it intimately. And that's what I like to hear about this. No one's doing any rash moves. They promised Ron Rivera a year. They gave it to him. They could have easily have gotten very itchy about what was going on with the way that the season was going. It's a team that went 1-7 at home and got boat raced by a number of teams, some of which aren't even in the playoffs at home. It was an embarrassing home season for them, and they stayed the course. They did what they promised, and it's a steady hand. It's nice to have a steady hand. It's nice to have thoughtful people again. It's nice to have people who are surrounding themselves with thought leaders making these decisions, and there is a real opportunity here. And then, it's an open roster. John, there's 26 guys who are not under contract. You're going to have a blank slate. You got the number 2 pick, which I'll get to in a minute as to why I think it's going to be a specific side of the ball coach.
DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL playoffs, is bringing you an offer that'll help make the playoffs electrifying. New customers can bet $5 on any game and get $200 instantly in bonus bets. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code KEIM, K-E-I-M. New customers can bet just $5 to get $200 instantly in bonus bets only on DraftKings Sportsbook with code KEIM. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.1800gambler.net. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY. In Connecticut, help is available. For problem gambling, call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort, 21 plus, age varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. See dkng.com/football for eligibility and deposit restrictions, terms, and responsible gaming resources.
And you do have a lot of cap room. And the one thing that I think I want to point out about the cap room thing, they have a lot of it, yes. But keep in mind that literally half the roster is not under contract. So there are a lot of players that need to fill out the roster, and they're not all going to be minimum salary
Great
players.
point.
So you have to understand here that, yes, they have a lot of cap room, but they don't have a lot of cap room with a full roster where they can go shopping for a couple of guys to take them over the top. They've got a full roster to fill out here. And so that's going to eat up a lot of it. I think people need to have an understanding of that, because they keep hearing $90 million in cap space. Yeah, because they have 26 guys under contract. No kidding, that much cap space.
They're going to have
fill out here.
That's a good point. And that, I don't expect them to be these crazy spenders in free agency. I think because of that, and I also think there's a couple things too, Bram. One, he talks about rapid but thorough approach to this search, but also, while you want to win quickly, as he said, sometimes you win quick. Sometimes you try to win quickly and it just goes bad. That's paraphrasing, but it's true. If you try to take shortcuts in how you build something, there might be some short-term success and long-term pain, as we've seen that here over the years. The other thing I want to point out too, this is something that may not matter to a lot of people, but I think if you're if you want to know who's in charge here and how they operate, Ron Rivera was in that building for multiple hours after he was let go. Now, some of that was cleaning out his office. Some of that was also going around and talking to people. Josh Harris was more than okay with him sticking around as long as he needed to stick around there. And I think it's the way this ended was, says a lot to me about how they treated him and how, you treat with respect and all that. But I think it bodes well for how they treat employees. And it's so dramatically different than what it had been for a long time. But I think that sort of humanistic touch, not that everything is perfect or whatever, but I do think like the way they approached and treated Rivera throughout this situation, it was not going well. They did not want to fire him during it because they gave him his word. They gave the word to others as well that they wouldn't do that. But I also think, as he said, there's no benefit, but it's just the way they treated him up through the end that I think it speaks highly to, I think, who, I think if you're working somewhere, you want to work in a situation like that.
Yeah. On that point, and I was talking about this on my radio show a lot, in thinking about just hearing them speak, because it was the first time they now are on the clock.
Right.
They are to actually start to do the things outside of, like, we tried to improve the stadium. We are talking to politicians about a new stadium and all that stuff and all those things that are going on, that had been going on. This is the first time they're putting their fingers on the scales of the football team. And, let's see how they work. For a long time throughout, I've been working in and around the organization and working for them for a very long time. And the lack of trust in the building, the undermining of people through the years, it's just, I don't know how you I don't know how you can be successful that way. And in anything. And, I loved the team. I loved working for them. I never felt like people were, undermining me, but I also wasn't in a position where I had any kind of real power. And I just watched this. And it's so funny when you talk about, like, you'd have all the answers because you've covered it for so long. Here's what I know in my years of being in and around this organization. I may not know exactly what the right calls are, but I know what the wrong ones are because I've lived them. I've seen them. I've seen the red flags. I've seen it over and over and over. And if this group, if the first thing they do this year is they get people in this that start trusting each other, that start working together, that start reminding each other that we're on the same team and we're going in the same direction, like, that is going to be a massive impact no matter what the roster looks like and how they move forward. Because the truth is, right now, I can't project whether they're going to be good on the field or not until I see their roster, and it's completely incomplete and a blank slate. And I don't think it's fair for any GM or coach or ownership group to put a team out there that's going to be competing overnight until we can see what they do. But if they start next year where there's this kind of feeling of everybody's working together and not against one another and distrusting the people that are next to one another, they'll have achieved a tremendous amount and make a humongous difference from what it's been over the last 20 plus years.
Oh yeah. And it makes a huge difference. And, people would notice it when they came here to work, like coaches or whatever, just how the building was. And I think it would surprise them how miserable some people were for a long time. And it rubs off. And it's like out there, it's a small building. It rubs off on other people, and players feel it. Everybody feels it. And it becomes it was toxic and bad. So, I think you're right. Like but that's why I bring that up is, there's a long way to go to see, like, is this a great ownership group or not? But we know that there's a dramatic difference in what it was like. And I think if you had to say which approach typically wins, it ain't the last one from 24 years. I can tell you that, because they never won. And they treated people poorly. That. And, I saw that from many, many people. And, for decades. And that's why I bring up the example with Rivera, because it was a day where they could have said, hey, get your stuff and get out. You're done. But they didn't. He was let go around 8:20. Bram, he was let go around 8:20. He was still there he left around 2:00. And the way they did it, they gave him the time in the room to do it at his pace. and to talk to the people he needed to. And I just think that bodes well for people who work there. So I do want to answer this question, Bram, from Joshua. Do we think it's possible? And we kind of talked about this, retained but made VP of player personnel. I would be surprised by that. I don't know what the track record for the player personnel hasn't been great. So I don't know why that would be a necessary move. But again, maybe they retain him, but I just don't know why, in that role. But then Tony DeLeo, wouldn't Peters want Slowick? Possibly. He would certainly know him very well. Again, just knowing them doesn't automatically mean they're going to want to hire them. We don't know. I don't know what he thinks of him as a leader, as a whatever. I mean, he's clearly done a good job. Slowick's done a nice job, but I also think, Ben Johnson's going to be a name high on everybody's list. And that guy's got a longer list of jobs that he's had in the NFL and positions that he's coached. And, so it could be that guy, but yes, the familiarity will certainly help make a decision with if it is indeed Peters.
On the coach too. So I'm open to either side of the ball, but here's where I'm leaning on this. And I think Ben Johnson's going to be at the top of their list, and we'll see, but I think there's going to be a bidding war for him. So we'll have to see how that goes. I think there's going to be a number of teams that are going to try to hire him. This is how I kind of feel about it. I'm also very interested in Mike McDonald from the Ravens. I'm very interested in that. But here's what I think. They've got the number 2 pick. They're going to take a quarterback, John. I don't even need to know who the next group is. That decision's easy here. I mean, there's too many good options at the top of the draft where you don't even have to trade. And if the Bears are going to take Caleb Williams and they are open to trading for him, I guess maybe if you fall in love with him, we can have that conversation because they'd go from 1 to 2. And that's an interesting move for them because they can get whoever they want and get assets. But if that's not the fall in love thing, you're turning over to an offensive coach and saying, are you in love with this quarterback? We can get him. And I really think that that's going to matter here. And so my gut tells me that the right direction is to pick somebody on the offensive side of the ball. But at the same time, when they say, we just want to get the best talent in here, I believe them. And if they believe the best talent is a defensive coach, I'll believe them. And we'll find out when they get here.
Well, what's interesting, Bram, is 5 of the 7 names we know that they've requested interviews for are on defense.
Yeah.
And if you go heavy on the analytics, which they are, and that's, the football side will be set up with a strong emphasis on that. And the key there is to be aligned. If you're not aligned with it, it's going to fail. But having said that, again, 5 of the 7 are in defense, and it's McDonald, it's Raheem Morris, who did spend some time on offense. It's Dan Quinn. I'm forgetting some of the other names already, but it is, that's, to me, I was surprised by that. Aaron Glenn, Anthony Weaver. So I'm surprised by that. And so to your point, first of all, the number one thing you have to get is a strong leader, somebody who's going to, John Harbaugh is not a play caller, so you can get guys, Mike Tomlin, defensive guy. So you can get guys like that, right? That aren't an offensive guy, but you better have a damn good plan for the quarterback. Because if you're drafting a young quarterback and you don't have a good plan on offense, okay, let's say you bring in coordinator X. Well, if this guy does well, look at Bobby Slowick in Houston. DeMeco Ryans is going to face a choice, whether it's this year or next offseason, where he's going to have to replace Bobby Slowick if it continues to progress. Then what do you do? So I'll look at Dan Quinn and what happened to him in Atlanta. And I've heard good things about Dan Quinn. I think it's going to be mixed on him, but I've heard I know people who have worked for him who really, really like him. One person said he's as good at creating a standard for an organization as he had worked for. So there's a lot of things with him. But where he started to fail is you have Kyle and his staff, Super Bowl. They have Sarkisian after that. They're still really good. But each time somebody leaves, it's harder to find that replacement. That's a trouble. That's one of the concerns is you better have a good succession plan in case. But if you're an offensive coach, Bram, and I agree with you, if you're an offensive-minded guy, you're going to develop something around them. But this is one thing, again, when you talk to some coaches, should they be a play caller as well? Because one of the things, and this is what another coach told me today, that when you have an offensive-minded head coach and they're busy being a coordinator as well, they don't always oversee the entire team. So, like, for instance, when Jay Gruden was here, I remember talking to him a lot about, he's heavy on the offensive side, obviously, and then there would be things going wrong on defense, but he couldn't address them because he's too busy over here. So issues that maybe he could have helped correct, like maybe the kind of blitzes you're running, those kind of things. He really didn't do any of that, or couldn't, because he was too busy doing that. Just curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I feel like that because I would be surprised if this team doesn't take a quarterback at number 2.
Shocked.
That's what they're going to do. That the head coach is going to be offensive minded. That's what I think is going to happen here. That if you're going to get the best and the brightest from that side of the ball, that's because for that reason. That's what you're going to do. The other thing I wanted to point out that I thought was really great, like regardless of their interest level in Dan Quinn, and I have a gut feeling that Dallas is going to do something to prevent him from leaving, frankly, including the possibility of replacing McCarthy with him. I don't think that's off the table, honestly. Like, Dan Quinn coming in here, the personnel chief with the Cowboys, personnel chief of the Eagles. These are the 2 teams you're chasing right now. These are the 2 teams that have built the best rosters in your division. These are the 2 teams that seem to have sustainable rosters. I don't know what's going on in Philadelphia. That is maybe the biggest storyline in the NFL, that they've cratered the way they've cratered with no reasonable excuse for the way that they've kind of collapsed during the season. So that'll be an interesting story to hear when their season's over. But I want to pick the brains of those 2 teams. That's who you're chasing. So whether you're hiring these people or not, get them in the room. Let's find out how they're thinking.
Oh, 1,000%. I think that's a great way to do it, because I'd also be curious to talk to people in the organization, in the division, about how they view this organization. And you can learn from that too. Those are fact-finding missions as well. So this is Juan wants to know, is Kyle Smith on the radar, as good as Peters, knows the organization, probably scouts he worked with on the team? I don't know if he's as good as Peters or not. I think Peters, I've heard he's really good. I know Kyle Smith is really good. I know when he was here and in charge of the draft, it was pretty good. And I think he's done a nice job as probably the primary personnel guy in Atlanta of rebuilding that roster, with the exception of quarterback. So, but I have not heard his name as being on the radar. He had a good situation in Atlanta. I don't know where that's going to go. I think you're working for an owner who is desperate to win before, he's very old. And I think their roster is pretty good, again, except for quarterback, kind of a big deal. Yeah. But I don't know, I have not heard Kyle's name yet mentioned. So I really couldn't say that he's on the radar. But I just haven't heard it mentioned.
All right, here's one for you. And it was premature, but it's worth asking because of the way the season went and things that he said publicly. What do you see happening with John Allen this offseason?
That's a good question. I think that's going to be a very big topic this offseason. Listen, I actually had somebody in the organization a few weeks ago saying that they should just trade him. And mainly because the contract is structured, it's a favorable team contract. I do believe that he is going to want to renegotiate to get some guaranteed money in the future, and I don't blame him. The feeling that my understanding is that, his side felt he signed a very team-friendly deal with the idea that when it was get to this point, the organization would do something for him. Well, this is a different organization. And it's funny because even Sam Cosmi said next year it's going to feel like he's joined a new team because of how many changes there are. So they don't owe him anything. I also wonder, Bram, too, if you're coming in and you look at it and you can say, when do you think this team will be good? And what level of play will John Allen be at that point, do you think? So I think I could definitely see, because I could see them coming in and certainly exploring that possibility. I mean, it would not shock me at all. How about you?
So to your point about his contract, it is at the point right now where you make a choice here. You either renegotiate and lower his cap hit, make him happy by giving him guaranteed money, or you move on from him. That's right. The reality of where his contract is right now. That is not the case with Terry McLaurin. And not that I'm suggesting that, but Terry McLaurin's deal is kind of unmovable right now. Not that I'm even suggesting for a second anybody would want to do anything about it, but that's not where we are in terms contractually of what we're talking about. Allen's is. And so that's why it's on the table here. Secondarily, listen, he was different this year. He made a lot of public proclamations, including one specifically that got a lot of play where he went on with the Junkies and said, I 1,000% think about going somewhere else. I did not hear his interview this morning. I read the quotes, and it always matters to me to hear it for context of how he said something, but it sounds like he walked back some of the, I want out of here, and seems more open to the idea of, I want to hear what the new GM, coach, whoever that may be, has to say, but he liked what Josh Harris had to say, and we'll see. But he has made it clear he doesn't want to be part of a rebuild. So part of this is going to be, do you want to be here? And he needs to figure that out. After all the dust settles here, do you want to be here? And if you don't, we'll accommodate a trade. But if you do, then we need to talk about your contract and how to make that work. And then lastly, I need to know what happened to him this year. He was not the same player. I know he was dealing with plantar fasciitis in the summer into the early part of the season. I know his knee was bothering him late and throughout the year. So I think he was injured. I think he played marginalized for the majority of the year. But he was not the same impact player that he typically has been and we've grown accustomed to. So I need to know where he is physically, what he has left to give, and where his desires are. And all of that needs to be answered to me before I can give you really any kind of answer of how I think Washington as a team should proceed with him.
Right. And there's a couple of things I would add to that. First of all, even shortly after with his first comments to the Junkies, someone else had told me that's very, that knows him very well. Was like, he's not looking to leave, but it was one of those things when, Seattle calls at the deadline and says, hey, they want to trade for him. I think it got him thinking like, oh, is there life beyond Ashburn? He's from here. He wants to see it win here. It mattered to him a ton what he saw at the Josh Harris press conference in July at FedEx Field, the excitement that was there. He wants to be a part of that. So I do believe that he wants to stay. And I do think, like, even if it's part of a rebuild, if it looks like it's going to pay off in a couple of years, I think he'd want to stay. But what I would say too, Bram, I don't know this for anything, is we don't even know who's going to be making the decision. Is it necessarily up to him? Would it be up to him? That right. I don't know, because again, you might look at it, if you're Adam Peters, Ian Cunningham, whomever comes in here in that role, and you can look and say, like, listen, we saw whether or not, however they interpret his play this year, if they felt like there was a decline, and then you look at the contract and you look at, like his age and how long you think this is going to take. And would you rather have the assets now, or would you rather have John Allen for the next few years? So I think there's going to be a lot to parcel out with that. It's not, I don't think it's a slam dunk. Oh, you got to do this. I think there's a lot of things to consider before we get to that point. But I do think it's going to be a discussion, right? No
doubt. I mean, he's at the time in his contract where you'd have it anyway, no matter who's in charge. And that's just the business cycle. And he knows that. He was so frustrated though this year. And I mean, it wasn't just the couple of times he said things publicly. I mean, it happened multiple times, and it was really unusual, actually, the amount of frustration that he really expressed this year. And it started very early, and it was noticeable. So let's fight, listen, the season's over. It's a lost season. He's going to take some time off. They need to, circle the wagons, figure out who's in charge of all of this. But it is something that's going to come up, and I can't really project which way it's going to go. But I think we need to revisit with him after he has some time to think about it. Does he want to be here? And if he does, then we can start the conversation of, okay, what are we going to do about it?
So Frank says, a comment, but it's going to lead to a discussion, not a quote, not a question. Safe to say Carson Taylor had been vindicated, was never the QBs. It was always Ron. I'd like to see what a young staff like McVay does with Sam. Well, so there's a couple of things like that. First of all, there was definitely some on the quarterbacks. It wasn't just like, I don't know how those guys had been vindicated. I think to your point, they were missing things. And I would absolutely agree with that. Like, we know, to me, a big failure here, and we've talked about this every year, Bram, it seems, the offensive line. And I think, that they never built the line that they needed with some of these quarterbacks. And then I think, quarterback play has not been great for a while. So I'm not going to say that they were vindicated, but I do think what was highlighted, Frank, was the need to build a stronger offense with the line, with the play calling. And I felt like, first of all, if you get a young staff, they're taking a quarterback. Like, there's no reason not to. You're going to take a guy like, even if it's Drake May, who Ben Johnson knows from Carolina. And by the way, here's another connection, is Rick Spielman's brother works for the Lions. Can kind of maybe give Rick Spielman a bit of intel on Ben Johnson. Anyways, if you see Drake May as having this higher ceiling, which anybody I talk to would say he does, you're going to take that guy. It starts to clock over. You get 5 years of control at a better salary financially. It makes a ton of sense. So would you like to see a young guy with him? Yes, you would. And I do think, Frank, to your point, yes, it could have been better. And again, line, play calling, and as someone else pointed out, they kind of, they kept saying that it was good for Sam's development to drop back and throw so much. And I disagree. I think it hurt him because you needed to be balanced to some level. It didn't have to be 50-50, but to some level you had to have more of a balance to help a quarterback and put him in better spots and not put it all on his shoulders.
We've been on for a while. This conversation, John, we could have this conversation for an hour.
Yes, we could. All right, well, let's finish on that then, Bram. What are your 2 cents on that?
It's a lot. One, Carson Wentz did not get picked up until the middle of December by the Rams because they needed a backup. So I don't know how he's been vindicated. He hasn't been playing for anybody else. And Taylor Heineke and his team are not in the playoffs. He did not win a job, whether he was in a real competition.
Taylor was better here.
God, who knows? And I mean, and trust me, I'm the biggest fan of that guy on earth. I loved what he did here. But that is not, neither one of those guys ended up being high-end quarterback play for them. So I don't think anybody's vindicated in all of that. I mean, like, the decision to get Wentz, to me, remains one of the bigger mistakes that occurred for this team throughout the tenure of Ron Rivera, because it did not work out. And it was predictable that it wasn't going to work out with the way that he was playing, not his personality, just the way he had been playing the last couple of years coming into it. And as far as like the EB thing goes, honestly, that's a long conversation. Like, there's a big part of me that goes, I don't know why they were so pass heavy. I mean, the team even started saying some of this. I don't think it was collaborative enough with the players. So, but on the other side of that, I will defend EB in that it's not like this group had really done much in years offensively, and they needed more accountability and they demanded it. And some of them recoiled from it before it ever got started. So I think there's a push and pull there. I think EB's a very good coach. I think he's a very demanding coach. And I kind of knew that this was going to be a push and pull. Did not go very well. The message didn't go well. I think Rivera's mistake was he didn't intervene quicker and become the lead voice in the room again. I think he ceded way too much power away and never really put his hands back on the wheel. And that was a problem. And as far as Sam goes, I agree. I think he was thrown to the fire. I don't like the setup for him. I don't know how throwing that much made a lot of sense. I think one of their best assets is Brian Robinson. How he was underutilized to the degree he was, I never understood that at all. And, there was some self-scouting that needed to happen. It started early, John, man. I red flagged it early. It was in the Bills game. Like, the first game there, those guys were standing exactly where Sam was going to throw the ball. Like,
yeah, but I would always say it to that
literally standing where they're going to throw the ball. And it occurred. A lot of these interceptions, some of it was this offense was very predictable. And these guys knew exactly where Sam was going to put the ball. And I felt for him. He got beat up. He was in what turned out to be a predictable offense. And, unfortunately, I think he threw the ball way too much. And I think his confidence obviously got shaken by the middle of the year.
Right. And I would say, like, even in that Bills game, the problem I have, and we've talked about this, like, they dropped into a basic Tampa 2 where the linebacker drops to an area and he didn't see the linebacker. So it was also as much about like him not seeing the field the right way and seeing the coverage and then throwing to an area where, all they're doing is they're dropping to their spots and he didn't recognize that.
Yes.
But I would say too, the one thing is, even with one of the ceding the power, that was a big deal for a lot of players with Rivera. Like, they felt like the first few years, it was really good that, they liked the we got to retire the word culture, but they liked how it was for the first few years. And then this past year that they didn't feel like he was the same guy for them. And because he had given so much power to Bieniemy and they couldn't go to him the way they had in some other situations. I would also say Taylor Heineke played better here than he did in Atlanta.
Yes,
so and so I don't know about that. And then the last thing is, you go back to the Wentz thing. It was like, I know this for a fact, like going into that whole period, there were definitely people who would say they're going to end up with Mitch Trubisky and then draft a quarterback. And then like people close to like Trubisky was saying that, and then it flipped late that they went after Carson because the owner did not want to go after Mitch Trubisky and now you can say maybe in that case, like, it's not like Mitch Trubisky went out and did great, but the point is it went a different way than what they had hoped it would. And that's how they ended up with Wentz. And then there was pressure to get it done. And they had to get it done by a certain time. And the Colts held them to their feet to the fire and got 2 third-round picks. Like, those kind of days are done. They're going to make mistakes, but you're not going to have an owner who's stepping his foot in there and saying, this is what you need to do.
Everybody makes mistakes. I mean, this guy that we're touting as the next head of the operation is in San Francisco, who gave up 3 first-round picks for Trey Lance, who is't on that team anymore. So everybody makes mistakes.
He can just blame it on John Lynch and then move on.
Yeah. That is his on Rivera, because like, it's funny that, he had this tenure, and because things happened so fast, we've just turned the page. We're like talking about literally everything else. Like, there are 2 things. Because he's such a high character guy, and I was really rooting for him all along. I wanted him to win, but this past year, like, the mistake, in my opinion, was he just put too much power in the other people's hands. And when his players came back to him and said, "We need you to intervene on our behalf a little bit," I don't think he did enough of it.
No, he did not.
Really, what his real, I think talent is that he's a motivator, and guys play for him. They play really hard for him. And it was so telling that typically in October and November, when this team, it becomes Rivera time, and this team steals itself and beats really good teams and is in every game, and it's like tough. They're a tough out. That didn't happen this year.
No,
because his voice wasn't prominent enough in the room from the get-go.
Agreed. 1,000% agree. Multiple players noticed that. And I think it was one of the downfalls of the season. Last thing here, and I do want to address this real quick, is why he's worried. Juan is worried that Peters wouldn't be here for long. Where's he going to go? If you're the president of football ops, like, first of all, he's not here yet. But secondly, if you have that title, unless you're running the organization, unless you're the owner, you're not going to have more power. Like, that's a really long time job for him. Like, I don't know, where is he going to go to top that title if that's what you have for anybody who's got that. So anyways, right, Bram?
No, I'm not. I don't worry about that.
We don't have to go on there. I just thought it was funny.
He's in a minor league franchise, and he's then now going to go to the major league one. Like, if he comes here, gets the title and all the job security, and it works, he'll be here for as long as he wants.
Yeah, if he's not here long, it's because it failed, not because, like, where you're going. If you're not going anywhere bigger than a president of football operations, unless you just screw up. So anyways, long time to discuss that, Bram. Thanks to everybody for tuning in and for joining us, and some good questions, some comments. And there's a lot to look forward to for you guys as we move forward. And I'm going to be doing shows just about every day, just throughout this, because there's a lot to discuss, and there's going to be a lot to discuss on the football field, which makes it very unique in this offseason. And it's a welcome change for all of us. Bram, thanks for joining me. Thanks everybody else. I'll be back Thursday morning with another podcast. I'll talk to you next time.